Heavy spoiler warning for all of The Boys, including Season 5, so watch at your own discretion. What happens when you take someone who was hurt, never give them time to heal, and force them to keep moving like pain is something they're supposed to survive quietly? You get Billy motherfucking Butcher.
Champions of the innocent, motherfucker!
Butcher is always performing strength. His masculinity is like a costume he refuses to take off. At first glance, all you see is control, leadership, confidence. A man who walks into every room like he already owns it. But if you pay attention, that control usually comes at a cost. He hurts people, manipulates them, and convinces himself it's necessary because his pain always comes first. After the finale of The Boys, I wanted to fully dissect Butcher's character because his ending made one thing very clear. This is not just a story about a violent, bloodthirsty man. It's a story about what happens when pain becomes identity. And because I like taking a more psychological approach to characters, that's what we're doing today. So if you enjoy this type of content, I'm here for you. I love you. The Boys as a show constantly rubs masculinity in your face.
Fucking nothing. Because I'm not a fucking pussy.
And that line is funny because it's so blunt, but it also tells you exactly what kind of world these characters live in. A world where weakness is humiliating, where vulnerability is shameful, where being a man means never being the one who breaks first. Psychologists Joseph Vandelo and Jennifer Bosson have a theory called Precarious manhood. The basic idea is that manhood is often treated as something unstable, something that has to be earned, defended, and proven over and over again. In their research, masculinity is not treated like something a man simply has. It becomes something he must constantly prove.
Butcher?
Get him out of here.
Butcher, wait! What are you...
This is a perfect way to view Butcher. Around other people, he is constantly demonstrating this need to be seen as powerful, like someone who can sacrifice himself for others. Even to the extent of taking an experimental strain of Compound V, the very thing he despises. He becomes closer to the thing he hates because in his mind, being strong enough to protect everyone matters more than what it costs him. Every threat, every insult, every reckless act of violence feels like Butcher trying to prove something, not just to the people around him, but to himself. And that is the main contradiction of Butcher's masculinity. He looks confident, he isn't afraid of being hurt, but he is afraid of being seen. That confidence is loud to mask his insecurities.
Come off it, Billy. You always have been. Because anyone who's ever loved you, you end up getting them killed, don't you? Me, Becca, now Yui. The last person in God's green earth trying to stop you from being a monster, and what do? Drag him down to your level. And he dies. And he will. And no one can stop you. Can they?
Because being seen would mean admitting that underneath all the violence, all the rage, all the insults, there is grief, there is guilt, there is fear, and the scariest for him is that there is love. There is a man who has lost people and has no idea what to do with that loss except turn it into a weapon, and Butcher puts it best.
With great power comes the absolute certainty that you'll turn into a right cunt.
Now, Butcher's quote is very much a reference to the quote from Spider-Man.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
But it's also similar to the idea that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Butcher understands corruption. He expects it. He believes power makes people worse. But the irony is that he corrupts himself to keep moving forward. He hates soups, but he takes Compound V. He hates monsters, but becomes more monstrous. He tells himself it's necessary. He tells himself it's revenge. But really, it's grief with nowhere else to go. Butcher believes power corrupts everyone, but still chooses power because he thinks his pain makes him the exception. Butcher's version of masculinity is simple, and honestly, scarily similar to the version a lot of men are taught today. Never back down. Never cry. Never be afraid. If you love someone, don't show them softness. Control them. Protect them so aggressively that they barely get a choice. And if they still get hurt, Blame yourself until the guilt eats you alive. If you're hurt or afraid, turn it into violence. If you feel like a bad person, find someone worse and obliterate them. This is how Butcher deals with his emotions. He does not process trauma, he weaponizes it. On the surface, this is part of what makes him look strong. Because a man screaming is often treated as more masculine than a man crying. But this is not strength, it's just fear with better posture. And this is where Butcher starts to feel less like an exaggerated character and more like an exaggerated version of a real psychological pattern. A large meta-analysis by Y. Joel Wong and colleagues looked at nearly 20,000 participants and found that stronger conformity to traditional masculine norms was generally connected to worse mental health and a lower willingness to seek psychological help. This analysis does not mean that masculinity is bad. That's an incredibly simple and incorrect way of looking at it. The problem is not masculinity, it is rigidity. Manhood, in the traditional sense, is often viewed as a strict rulebook of never being allowed to be viewed as weak, soft, or even asking for help. Masculinity stops being part of an identity and becomes a cage. And Butcher lives in that cage. Butcher would rather destroy himself than admit he needs help. Guilt and fear, grief, love. Every emotion his version of masculinity would call weak has to be turned into violence because revenge gives pain a direction. Revenge helps Butcher avoid the feeling of helplessness from grief. It gives him a mission, a reason to keep moving forward without turning around and looking at everything he's been through. Instead of sitting with the fact that he lost Becca, instead of facing the guilt of what happened to Lenny, instead of admitting he is terrified of becoming like his father, he can keep hunting. He can keep telling himself that violence is purpose. Butcher puts on a masquerade that he is emotionally empty, operating on a strict logic that gets the job done. However, it is the opposite. He is not emotionally empty. He is emotionally overloaded. He just lives under a version of masculinity where sadness has to become rage before it's allowed to exist. This version of masculinity is personified through the hallucination of Kesler. Kesler is not a random hallucination. Kesler is connected to Butcher's guilt and his conflicted emotions. Becca represents the part of Butcher that still wants to love, and Kesler represents the part of him that believes love is exactly what made him weak. In particular, he represents the purest form of Butcher's negative traits of his masculinity, the part that thinks weakness is pitiful, that thinks genocide is acceptable. Kesler is Butcher's pain after it stopped trying to appear human. The reason Kesler works so well is because he never introduced any new ideas. He merely says the things Butcher already believes. Where Butcher wavers, Kesler dominates. And the more you see Butcher listening to Kesler, the less he listens to Becca. And this is where Butcher's goal starts sounding a lot less like justice and more like psychological egoism, which is the idea where even if people believe they are acting altruistic, it is truly in the pursuit of self-interest. Butcher tells himself he is protecting the world, but Kesler exposes the uglier truth. This is not just about saving people anymore. It's about revenge, control, guilt, the need to make his pain mean something. Kesler acts as a hallucinated model of Butcher's self-interest. All he desires is scorched earth, constantly telling Butcher he's soft and only validating him when he hurts others, reminding him of everything he's done wrong, just to make him feel weak. The real Kesler died in the Panjshir Valley. Butcher was never able to drag him out. Kesler doesn't remind Butcher of the guilt to help him heal. He does it so that Butcher is easier to control. Kesler does to Butcher what Butcher did to Huey, finds a grieving man, calls his pain a weakness, and turns him into a weapon. At the beginning of the show, Butcher treats Huey like a tool. Huey was in the middle of grieving Robin, and Butcher already knows how to weaponize grief. His original goal is to turn Huey into a weapon and point it directly at Vought. But as Butcher gets to know Huey, he sees more of his little brother in him. Butcher desperately wanted a second chance to save his brother. He hated himself for leaving Lenny when he was most vulnerable. But Huey gives Butcher the chance to save someone he loves for once. Not just from Vought, but from the corruption Butcher dragged him into. And this is where Butcher's masculinity is shown to become dangerous, because he doesn't know how to love someone without trying to harden them. When Huey wants to be good, Butcher pulls him towards violence. The most tragic part is that Butcher thinks that his pain towards Huey is worth it because he believes he is preparing him. In Butcher's mind, he's sacrificing the softness in Huey's soul to make him a better soldier, a better man. Butcher was hurt, so he became hard. Now he sees hardness as wisdom, and because he sees it as wisdom, he passes it on. That's the cycle. Pain becomes identity. This is also where the idea of masculine discrepancy stress fits really well. Researchers use that term to describe the stress that some men feel when they believe they aren't living up to masculine expectations. In normal words, when a man feels like he's not man enough, one way he may respond is by overcorrecting, becoming louder, harder, more dominant, more aggressive. Butcher always translates pain into something that looks more masculine. That is why he can care about someone and still damage them. Because in Butcher's mind, love is not soft, love is not gentle, love is not honest, love is protection, and protection means control. This is what happens with Ryan. Ryan exposes the deepest flaws within Butcher and represents two different opposing sides, the kind and gentle nature of Becca and the despicable actions Homelander committed to conceive Ryan. Everything Becca meant to Butcher is what made him able to love, but the part of Ryan that represents Homelander reminds Butcher of the man who ripped his wife away from him, the man who ruined his life. Ryan is both Becca's final wish and a representation of everything Homelander ruined for Butcher. So Butcher is stuck with a choice. Does he pick Becca, choosing to view Ryan as a child from the love of his life, honoring her final wish and giving Ryan the love Becca wished for him to give? Or does Butcher view Ryan as a son of Homelander, despising him for what he represents? As always, Butcher picks the most violent, cruel option. He does not know how to feel more than two things at once without picking the more violent one. Instead of telling Ryan what he feels deep down, instead of saying, "I'm scared of loving you because you remind me of everything I've lost," he pushes Ryan away. Instead of being vulnerable, he becomes brutal, because vulnerability would mean admitting that he has no idea what he's doing, and Butcher's entire identity is built around never admitting that. This is why Becca is so important when looking at Butcher's character. She proves that Butcher was never just naturally heartless and aggressive. He was capable of love without performance. That's why losing her breaks him so badly, because Becca is not just someone he loves. She is a proof that there was another version of him. A version that could have lived differently. A version that could have been more than revenge. But when he loses her, that version of him becomes too painful to touch. So he buries it. And the deeper he buries it, the louder the performance becomes. The reason I say performance is because his masculinity is inherently theatrical. The more pain he hides, the more exaggerated the mask becomes. And this is why his relationship with Homelander works so well. On the surface, Butcher and Homelander are completely different. Psychologically, though, they are mirrors of each other. Both are obsessed with control, terrified of vulnerability, and put up a mask to hide who they truly are inside. Scared men who were forced to become what they are. Sometimes power is just insecurity that found a weapon. Homelander with his superpowers, and Butcher with temporary V and rage. But both of them use these weapons to avoid the same truth. They are deeply afraid of being unloved. Homelander represents everything Butcher wants to destroy in the world, but he also represents something Butcher fears in himself. The possibility of becoming a man so consumed by power, pain, and control that love becomes impossible. Butcher hates monsters, but he is also terrified that he is one. And the tragedy is, he uses that fear as an excuse to keep becoming worse. Because if he is already a bastard, then why change? If everyone already sees him as the violent one, the cruel one, the necessary evil, then he never has to become anything else. That's another part of the masculine facade. Sometimes the mask is not just about looking strong. Sometimes it's about lowering everyone's expectations until nobody asks you to be gentle anymore. If everyone believes you are a monster, you never have to prove you are a man, and Butcher hides inside of that. He lets people see the worst version of himself because it's easier to maintain than the honest version. An honest version of Butcher would probably say, "I miss her. I wish my father loved me. I don't know who I am anymore." But he never says these things. He smirks, he fights, he performs. In Butcher's final moments, you see all of these traits exemplified at their greatest. Ryan tells him he doesn't want to be with him, and terror dies. After all the warfare, Butcher is left with nothing. So he decides to take this grief out of him by continuing the fight. He never stops. He's relentless because he can never stop fighting due to his fear of facing his emotions. Once Huey makes his way to the tower, though, his kindness is contrasted with everything Butcher has become. Huey, still trying to see the good in Butcher, tries to reason with him, and is met with a brick wall of absolute certainty. And Huey in his kindness tries to stop Butcher, but they start fighting, and when Butcher gets a hold of the trigger, seeing Huey on the ground, he gets a flashback of Lenny. This represents his mask cracking. The performance ends here. He's no longer putting on a front. If he was, he would have pulled that trigger, but he decided it's over. He no longer wishes to put on this facade of invulnerability when he's grieving. Seeing Huey on the ground brings Lenny back all at once, not as a memory, but as guilt, as grief, as the proof that Butcher has spent his whole life trying to outrun the same wound, only to find it lying in front of him again. I'm gonna let Butcher's death play out on screen and then talk about it with you guys afterwards, just to remind you guys of the very small details in the scene.
Sorry. I didn't want to do that. I'm gonna call an ambulance, okay?
I wouldn't bother. It's all right, Huey. I gave you no choice. I wasn't gonna stop. All the blood and shite I put you through. And none of it made the blind bit of difference. You stayed yourself. No matter what I've done. I don't know what to do.
You don't need to do anything.
You really are. That's better, Lenny.
Okay, to start off, this scene had me crying, but let's get into the details. First off, after getting shot, Butcher's first reflex was to tell Huey that it's okay.
It's all right, Huey. I gave you no choice.
He's so tired of hurting people, and he can't stand the thought of Huey feeling regret after his death, so he immediately forgives him, even telling him it was the right thing to do.
And shite I put you through. And none of it made the blind bit of difference. You stayed yourself. No matter what I've done.
Butcher here is framing himself as the villain. What I done. This is so beautiful because he isn't putting on this role of leadership. He's putting himself at a level where he's below Huey, showing that Butcher is a terrible human being and Huey's kindness makes him better than Butcher.
I don't know what to do.
This is the first honest line we hear from Butcher in the entire series. The man lost his wife, his little brother, was a soldier and CIA agent forced into war after war. He never had time to breathe, let alone process his emotions. And as he's dying, this is the first time he does and realizes how truly lost he was. The words coming from his mouth felt so bleak, so terrified of what's to come when there wasn't much time left. Butcher had cancer that gave him less than 2 years to live, and he still had that same confidence. But in this moment with Huey, he let go of the performance and embraced his inner feelings.
You really are. That's better, Lenny.
This is the final nail in the coffin. Butcher is telling Huey once again how much he reminds him of his brother, but with the context shown before, he's telling Huey more than that. He's telling Huey that he was reminded exactly how he treated Lenny, dragging him into this darkness, but the difference is Huey stayed himself. He stayed that innocent, kind human being that he always was. Huey never lost hope, and Butcher lets himself die because for once, he refuses to survive at the cost of another brother. That's the difference between masculinity as strength and masculinity as performance. Real strength can be honest. Performance has to keep proving itself. And Butcher is always proving himself. Every insult, every threat, every reckless decision is him saying, look at how little I care. But the truth is he cares so much that it's killing him. That's the lie at the center of Billy Butcher. He acts like a man with nothing to lose, but everything he does is shaped by what he already lost. And maybe that's why his character works so well. Because The Boys is not just showing us a violent man, it's showing us how violence can become a personality when a man has no other way to express pain. It's showing us how masculinity can become a costume when vulnerability feels impossible. And it's showing us that the scariest thing about a man like Butcher is not that he feels nothing, it's that he feels everything, and he's convinced himself that the only acceptable way to show it is destruction. Billy Butcher is not the fantasy of masculinity, he is the warning. Because the mask may make you look strong, but if you wear it long enough, eventually you forget how to take it off, and by the time you realize it was only ever a mask, there might not be much of you left underneath.